This is Suzanne Kenney, and you're listening to the Crime and Canvas podcast. My story begins with a deeply personal puzzle spanning decades, rooted in the act of betrayal against my own mother. It was in this pursuit of understanding her truth that I found myself unexpectedly entangled with the 1990 Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum art heist, a crime whispered about for years and one I believe I've solved. In episode 1, we discussed how this man, Frederick R. Koch, arrived in my mother's life at her flea market booth in Okeechobee, Florida, selling her artwork by master artists. Welcome to episode 2. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the artwork itself, specifically the pieces I personally saw and photographed. Now, my mother was sold many artworks, some of which I have never even had the chance to see, but the ones we can discuss here are truly remarkable. I could never imagine that my life would lead me to the discovery of an unknown Vincent van Gogh, or that I would ever get to touch such a painting. Art wasn't anything I grew up around or was particularly interested in. My only connection to it came through my mother, Mary, as she shared her incredible stories about her art encounters with Mr. Koch in late 1991 and in early 1992. Thanks to her journey, I've had the immense privilege of researching many master artists, honestly, discovering the pieces and immersing myself in their beauty and history has been one of the few parts of this entire story that I've truly enjoyed. That joy also extended to building the websites that showcase this artwork, designing booklets to highlight their authenticity, even if they're marked by the story's shadow, including the book Crime and Canvas that I self published on Amazon. Now, as I discuss these pieces, if you want some visuals to help follow along, please visit crimeandcanvaspodcast.com. Click on the evidence link in the top navigation. At the top of that list is the artwork, and you can follow along from there. My mother would mention names everyone has heard of, like Picasso and Van Gogh, but also others I had never encountered. Artists like Calder, Peterson, and Manet, Kees van Dongen, Camille Bombay. I was in my early 20s then, young and focused on my own life. Buying and selling collectibles was simply what my mother did. However, as years passed and my mother shared her growing difficulties in getting anyone to help her with this baffling artwork, I began to find myself drawn deeper and more interested into her art story. Now, my mother wasn't about artwork either. She was just about selling collectibles. So this was a new experience for both of us. The artwork that I personally saw and photographed are by the following artists: Alexander Calder, Camille Bombay, Edward Manet, Jane Peterson, Jim Castle, Kees van Dongen, Pablo Picasso, and Vincent van Gogh. Let's begin with the Alexander Calder. My mother received 5 distinct pen and pencil drawings from Mr. Koch. She specifically recalled how Mr. Koch described them as doodles, and she was always very particular about stressing that they were, in fact, pen and pencil drawings and doodles. They depicted lively circus type scenes. Now, from the handwritten notes that we'll dive into in a later episode, we learn even more about these pieces. The notes state that these Calder drawings are from the Hopkins Gallery in Palm Beach and were previously owned by Calder's housekeeper, a Mrs. Clifford. We do delve more into these Calder drawings in episode 5 when we discuss the authentication challenges, which we delve into several pieces, but there's a lot more to talk about on these Calder drawings. Next, we have a piece by Camille Bombay. From the same notes, it's mentioned that this painting is from the Naviette period. Its visual style strongly indicates it's an early piece, likely from when he was first learning to paint, and it's done on board. Moving on to Edward Manet, this is a truly beautiful beach oceanside painting, a small canvas mounted on board. This particular painting is also mentioned in Mr. Koch's notes with my mother, where it's simply stated as being from Spain. I actually created a detailed book specifically on this painting, and you can view it along with my findings on my Crime and Canvas podcast.com and click the evidence link in the top navigation. You'll find it there. Now, let's talk about the Jane Peterson. My mother received 3 paintings by this artist, all featuring birds. There's a stunning snowy egret done in a watercolor on Kodak paper, a painting of a pelican, which notably has water damage and looks like it was cut directly out of its frame, and a very beautiful painting of white parakeets, which also appears to be cut as if from a frame. The Jane Peterson snowy egret painting, the one on Kodak paper, holds immense significance. It was the piece that Sotheby's actually authenticated. I believe my mother's decision to pursue authentication with Sotheby's is what ultimately triggered the Koch brothers figuring out what their brother Fred had been up to in Okeechobee. What happened next was the mysterious hospital scene we discussed in episode 1, where Fred faked an aneurysm and his own death. After that whole bizarre episode, since my mother couldn't get any more direct help from Fred, she decided to go back and proceed with selling the painting with Sotheby's. We have the signed Sotheby's contract on the evidence link at crimeandcanvaspodcast.com, and it clearly proves the date and time period we're claiming. This authentication was unique because, as Mr. Koch explained to my mother, and Sotheby's later confirmed, that Jane Peterson's husband was an attorney for Kodak paper, and the Kodak paper is mentioned in the handwritten notes. The attorney contracted with Kodak for them to make special, unique paper exclusively for Jane's work, which is why Sotheby's could authenticate it without needing the traditional provenance chain, and why they couldn't authenticate any of the other artwork, because the others didn't have that same special uniqueness and needed the province. We also have the Sotheby's auction catalog this painting was featured in, available on our evidence link on the crimeandcanvaspodcast.com website. This painting didn't sell at auction, and my mother still has this painting, as far as I know. Moving on to the Jim Castle. This is a print, and it probably carries the most personally interesting and memorable story of all the pieces. Over the years, the story my mother would recount most vividly was about this very print. It is torn and stained and frankly looks like garbage. I even told her once, "Mom, just throw it away." But she insisted, "No, this piece is the most important and valuable of all the pieces I got from him." She said it's the only one he gave her, not sold, and his hands were visibly shaking when he handed it to her. It was tucked away in a folder inside an envelope. I have stared at this print a lot over the years, trying to understand its significance, thinking there is no way this is worth more than the Van Gogh. Boy, was I wrong. And in episode 7, we will discover why this is. Jim Castle is even mentioned twice in Mr. Koch's handwritten notes with my mother. Next, we will talk about the Keys Van Dongen. This is a beautiful ink on paper, a watercolor in a sepia tone, or possibly a sepia ink wash drawing. It's depicting a lady in a hat. Next is the Pablo Picassos. Mr. Koch sold my mother 4 paintings and drawings by this renowned artist. Unfortunately, I only have photographs of 3 of them. The 4th piece, as my mother told me, was a drawing of a man and a beast. My mother was not fond of the drawing, and she quickly traded it with another vendor at the flea market. She traded for a painting of a local artist. I believe her name is Dorothy Chilcott. Years later, the story was heard that the man who bought it went on to sell that very drawing at Sotheby's for over $150,000. This would have been sometime in the late 1990s or early 2000s. According to the handwritten notes from these transactions, these Picasso pieces were formerly part of the collection of H. Lead and were purchased from a Marble House gallery in London. The notes even specify the 1953 auction catalog numbers 22, 28, 33, and 41. Among the pieces I saw and photographed are a 1921 pencil drawing. It's a pencil drawing of a man, and it has a name written on it in another language. A 1936 drawing, which is in the famous essay style. Says it originated from the Marble House Gallery in London. The 1937 painting, I determined this to be a depiction of the village of Martix. Also appears to be cut as if from a frame. I created a detailed booklet specifically on this painting, outlining my findings. You can view it and explore my research by visiting Crime and Canvas podcast and clicking the evidence link in the top navigation. Okay, now let's turn to the Vincent van Gogh. We're going to dive a bit more in depth into this painting, and for obvious reasons. This isn't just any piece of art, it's potentially the most valuable, a true lost treasure that holds immense significance to our story. I'm sure Morocco would love to know of this painting. And proving its reality is the key to unlocking it all. I've created a detailed booklet for this painting available on our evidence link on the crimeandcanvaspodcast.com website, where you can view it and look over my research as I discuss it here. The Van Gogh painting is titled The Moroccan, a detail we know from the notes. I believe the subject is Moulay Hassan I, the last Sultan of Morocco, and was alive during Van Gogh's active painting career. He was born in 1831, ascended to the throne in 1873, and died in 1894, which was just a couple years after Van Gogh's own death, aligning perfectly with the timeline. The painting also shows clear signs of having been cut from its frame. This method of removal, where a painting is physically cut, is something we've observed in several of the pieces, like the Jane Peterson and Picasso paintings. It raises critical questions. Why are these artworks cut this way? Was it, as Koch suggested, for the damage, a frantic act to save them quickly from a devastating fire? Perhaps the frames were attached to walls. You couldn't just grab them in their frame and run out. Does it point to something else entirely that we discover and discuss in a future episode? Let's consider the reasons Vincent van Gogh could have painted this Sultan. Van Gogh's most active painting period was from 1880 to 1890. During this time, the Sultan would have been 49 to 59 years old, an age that matches the man in the painting. The man in the painting bears a strong resemblance to images found online of Moulay Hassan I. Van Gogh was known to enjoy painting a night sky in the background. The painting style appears to be significantly inspired by Eugene Delacroix, who also famously painted a prior Sultan of Morocco in 1845. Van Gogh was deeply influenced by Delacroix. According to Eugene Delacroix's Wikipedia page, Theo van Rysselberg was also influenced by Delacroix. Rysselberg not only painted Moroccan subjects, but even created a drawing of the same Sultan of Morocco, Moulay Hassan I, in 1887. Crucially, two direct quotes from Rysselberg's Wikipedia page state, in December 1887, he was invited, together with Edmond Picard, to accompany a Belgian economic delegation to Meknès, Morocco. During these 3 months, he made many color pencil sketches. He also drew a portrait of the Sultan, and in Paris, he had a meeting with Theo van Gogh and managed thus to invite Vincent van Gogh to the next exhibition in Brussels. That is where Van Gogh sold his one and only painting that he sold. In the booklet on the evidence link at the Crime and Canvas podcast website, you'll find a painting by Reiselberg titled Maria Seth at the Harmonium from 1891. This painting has remarkably similar color tones, purples and burgundies, to the Van Gogh painting of the Sultan of Morocco. It even features curtains with the exact same colors used in our Van Gogh painting. This suggests Van Gogh could have borrowed paint from Reiselberg, further connecting these two artists and validating the painting's context. I do believe this theory has been used to solve other Van Gogh's paintings where he has borrowed paint, whether it was from Reiselberg or another artist. I don't recall. This Vincent van Gogh painting was sold by Mr. Koch to my mother Mary in 1992. Its significance is underscored by its multiple mentions in the handwritten notes from Koch's visits with Mary. We also know this painting has undergone restoration work at some point, visible under a black light. One would naturally think such an investment in restoration would only be made for a painting of significant value. As you'll remember, some of this artwork arrived with damage, which Koch told my mother was from being saved from a fire at an art storage warehouse. That fire, its timing, and what it means for this case is a crucial mystery we'll explore in depth in episode 6. Through my mother's story, I've had the unexpected privilege of delving into the lives and works of many master artists, including this incredible Van Gogh painting. But even amidst that beauty, the stark reality of the deception and the immense injustice tied to these very pieces is undeniable. And that injustice is why I stand. This is not what our country was founded on. No one should wield the power to silence truth, to dictate whose voice matters. That's why I'm here talking to you. This podcast is born from that very defiance. I might never claim a courtroom victory, but those who follow this story know I won't give up. I refuse complicity. Mary's story is more than stolen art. It's about systemic corruption, powerful accountability, and the very foundation of justice. Your decision to listen, to share, to engage is how we bypass the silence, is how we ensure this story is heard in full by the public. We're building a community for unheard voices. In our next episode, episode 3, we'll dive into the notes connection, exploring the handwritten notes from Frederick Koch's visits with my mother and how those seemingly simple details reveal crucial links. For documented evidence, visit theartworkstory.com and sign up for my newsletters. To join a wider movement for truth, visit uhv.news. Unheard Voices, where every voice matters, and submit your story. Thank you for joining me on the Crime and Canvas podcast. This is Suzanne Kenney. I'm grateful for your time and your willingness to hear this story. Let's always remember the truth is still the truth, even if no one believes it.